Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here today by my friend atlaspowershrugged, someone who I've enjoyed your content for a very long time, and so I appreciate you being on here and talking with me today.
Thank you very much. Happy to be on, man.
Why do you work out in a parking lot wearing jeans?
Well, yeah, that all started back in 2020 during the lockdowns. When the gym shut down, obviously, like everyone was trying to find home fitness stuff. I happen to have a deadlift bar, a Rogue deadlift bar. By the way, I'm not sponsored by them, but I should be. I've stress tested that thing more than. I mean, I feel like I should be a pretty good advertisement for the quality of their deadlift bars. They're not designed to stand up to nearly what I've done to that thing. But anyway, so I had a deadlift bar because a lot of us are out there obsessed with like squat, bench, and deadlift. So you know, young dumb me, I was willing to spend extra money on a deadlift bar just to be able to pull 6 plates a little bit easier. I would haul the thing to the gym with me. That's how silly the obsession with certain lifts is. But anyway, so I happened to have that when the lockdown started, and then I was able to get some bumper plates pretty quick. At first, I only had like 185, but I added to it gradually, and then some rings and stuff. So I mean, at first it was just by necessity, and everybody was doing it. It wasn't odd at the time. I had other people in my complex. The guy across the fence from me everyone was doing it. But that was also the same time that I started having kids. We had our first kid right before the lockdown started, so it was pretty convenient to just have that there, and I just kind of kept doing that when when the gyms opened back up because the drive time was really not worth it. Whatever I'd lose and or whatever I get from it wasn't worth 15 minutes each way to the gym, so I just kept working out here. I mean, that was really key to just making use of the small time windows you have as a parent, like nap time. If your workout is nap time, you can't afford to lose, drive time, right? Or, sometimes back in the day, I could get workouts after my kids went to sleep. Now, not so much because now that we have three, the wife's with a baby, and I have to be with the middle kid because she won't sleep on her own. So like, I can sneak out and do work, so I'll do work, but I can't go outside and lift or anything anymore. So we've chipped away. But anyway, point being, I do it because it's easier with the kids. If that weren't a factor, I'd probably get a gym membership. I mean, I like just being able to work out there sometimes, but I'd probably get a gym membership to set certain things up that are just kind of difficult to set up. But overall, yeah, it's the time thing.
I think that's going to be kind of a central theme to what we get at for the most of this conversation, which is just like trying to balance the workouts and your life and fit things in and not worrying about being so perfect and, dare we say, optimal and all of these kind of things. With the workouts in outside and stuff like that, is that when you started with the more unconventional kind of old school lifts, or was that something that you were more into even pre lockdowns and having like full equipment kind of stuff?
It mostly. I'd done a couple of things, like I'd already done Zercher squats. That's kind of meathead's first odd lift. I'd done Zercher squats, gotten pretty heavy at those because there's not a lot of mobility or skill necessary there. You can just come in with a you know hardcore attitude and just load some heavy weight in your elbows and mog the gym. That was fun. I should have posted more of that back in the day because I was doing 500 to death at a time when not too many people were even doing them at all. But whatever. I done some one hand deadlifts and some one hand snatch, but that was pretty much it. I wasn't doing much in the way of odd lifts. If you count power shrugs, I mean, I just consider that a bodybuilding exercise. It's just good bodybuilding. It just doesn't look the way we usually associate bodybuilding with, but it totally is just a hypertrophy exercise. So I've done a couple, and the underlying theme here is these are all just like brute strength meathead movements. I'd never gotten into any of the other stuff, so yeah, when I didn't have the opportunity to just go in and lift really heavy, because I was like most people, a power builder. I just wanted to go in, squat, bench, deadlift, and my little variation on that is sometimes I'd Zercher squat, sometimes I'd one hand deadlift, right? But it was still I'm going to go in there and squat, bench, deadlift, and maybe I'll even decline bench, get real crazy out there. But there was not a lot of variety. But in the back of my head, I did know that all these old time strongmen did all sorts of crazy stuff. I'd read descriptions of stuff like bent presses, Arthur lifts. It didn't make much sense to me at the time, and it wasn't. it didn't make a lot of sense to me, like reading a verbal description of these lifts, and then also, I didn't want to take time away from these all important squat, benching, and deadlifts, So I never got into it. But then when I only had like 185 pounds out there, you can't get a lot out of deadlifting that. I mean, it's not even enough for I mean, you can't do much with that at all. So I had to find ways to use that weight, and lo and behold, some of that stuff turned out to be pretty cool, and I started to make progress, enjoy training more, like develop in ways that I had, and I started to actually gain more muscle. This at that time I was probably like what, like 10. Oh man, it's a long time. I'm old. I was probably at least 10, maybe a little bit more years into lifting. So I thought I'd hit my natty limits. At that time the standards were much lower. I would say people didn't have such high expectations for naturals. We certainly wouldn't have any debates over whether this some kid with 20-inch arms is natural at that time. So, I thought I'd, hit my natural limits, and lo and behold, I start taking off weight and not doing all this just squat, bench, deadlift all the time, doing some different stuff. I start building muscle, just getting stronger, getting more flexible, moving better. It's like, okay, this is cool. So kind of, yeah. So that I'd known in the back of my head that it was there. I'd always read Chaos and Pain's blog, Jamie Lewis, also the Tight Tan Slacks of Dezaban, which is a fantastic resource for it's got a ton of old articles from like the 50s, the 60s, 70s, 40s. It's just a ton of old muscle magazine articles by folks like John Grimek, things like that. I'd read some cool stuff like that, but I just if you read a verbal description of an Arthur lift, it just does not make sense to you. So I never really tried it myself.
I want to circle back to the kind of the old time lifts and bringing those back and skill acquisition and all those things. But one thing you mentioned there that I don't want to miss is that you mentioned it in relation to the power shrugs, that it's a bodybuilding exercise, but that doesn't necessarily look like bodybuilding. Can you explain that a little bit more, and what maybe people perceive to be bodybuilding and what bodybuilding might actually be, given the context that people listening to this are probably not looking to be competitive bodybuilders, but are in some way, shape, or form looking to build their body, as in gain a little bit of muscle, lose a little bit of fat. So can you tell us a little bit about, can you just explain that, like what bodybuilding looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, when you think, I mean, from not from a complete outsider's perspective, but from someone who's into fitness culture, but not maybe super into any one thing, you kind of think of a bodybuilding training style as being like really controlled, focusing on your squeezing, your mind muscle connection, just really feeling the movement, making everything like slow, deliberate, controlling the weight. And that is effective and proper for a lot of exercises. That so that's kind of the stereotypical bodybuilding style of training. That doesn't necessarily work for every muscle group in every area. I think with shrugs, that's an exercise where that doesn't work. Another example is rows. Typically, the best bodybuilders don't actually use a super strict rowing style, just because the resistance curve is kind of weird if you do that. It's very easy to move at the bottom, like when your arms are fully extended at the bottom, and then as you pull it up towards your chest, it gets increasingly hard. So most bodybuilders, unless they're like really ideological about their technique, and frankly, most good bodybuilders are a little bit more pragmatic, like actual champions, not like internet experts, but champions tend to be pragmatic. You're going to typically see some body English in rows just because they need to smooth out that resistance curve. And I think with shrugs, it's kind of an even more extreme example. Now that hasn't been adopted as much in bodybuilding culture for two reasons. The number one is that there's this old kind of myth in bodybuilding that if you develop your traps too much, it's going to make your shoulders look narrow. That and not everything old is good. That actually goes back to people like Steve Reeves and Vince Gironda who believe that. And I think it's nonsense. I mean, there are plenty of, like, if you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, he had massive traps, and it certainly did not make his shoulders look narrow. Serge Nubret, guys like that, they weren't. I mean, you don't look at them and say, "Man, that guy's narrow." And then, I think typically if you're going to see someone with narrow shoulders, it's because they probably have narrow shoulders, and you can't do anything about that. So why underdevelop yourself trying to compensate? It doesn't work like that, right? But anyway, there's always been a little bit of disinterest in the bodybuilding community in building traps. And then there's probably some truth to the idea that there's more androgen receptors in the traps than other areas. So if you do just take a bunch of steroids, not always. Some guys take a bunch of gear and they actually don't develop their traps. But in a lot of cases, especially if you're rowing and deadlifting and whatnot, if you're deadlifting heavy and you're rowing and you're taking gear, you're probably going to get some traps anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. The issue comes in if you're trying to build them naturally and you don't have all that. You may not be deadlifting heavy enough weights naturally. A lot of people won't to really just maximize your trap development. So anyway, yeah, traps are the shrug is another movement where that resistance curve is kind of crazy. You're not going to be able to just completely squeeze up and feel the movement with nearly the amount of weight that you would need to actually challenge that stretch portion, which is probably more effective for development. So enter the power shrug. It looks crazy. It doesn't look like a bodybuilding movement. It looks like something that a dumb meathead would do. But in this case, the dumb meatheads are exactly right. And it's very good for up traps.
Great description there. One thing that is like sticking out to me is that people will see the kind of optimal, internet bodybuilder guy now who is not an actual competitive bodybuilder and think that they need to do that, not realizing that that is like several levels between them. And even if you take the idea that traps make your shoulders look narrow, which, fine, that's like an aesthetic look, and maybe that's relevant to competitive bodybuilding and maybe not. But again, most people not actually looking to that. They're just kind of looking to, be a little bit more jacked. In which case, if you're looking to do that, like you're wearing a shirt most of the time, you're not standing on stage in your underwear all tanned up and everything. And so like having big traps and big shoulders together is going to make you like, it's going to fill out that look anyways. And
Hmm.
so maybe and again, I'm not a bodybuilding judge. Like, what do I know? Maybe in bodybuilding that is a thing, but like for 99.9% of everyone else, having bigger traps is not going to make, like, having bigger muscles is not going to make you look smaller. I think you could just sum it up like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that gets into the difference between like competitive aesthetics and regular dude aesthetics. So much of competition today it is just about that low body fat and whatever the judges happen to be looking for. And that's not always applicable to regular guys. And yeah, traps, that's something that no matter what clothing you wear, no matter what you're facing, that big traps are always going to make you look like you lift. I mean, we have this phenomenon of this kind of trend of people doing the whole like this is what I look like after like 11 years of lifting or whatever, and they look really underwhelming because they're in like not the best lighting. I mean, if you have big traps, you can't find lighting that's at least that's going to make that an issue, right? You look at these guys typically. Well, I mean, now I've seen some guys that are actually doing it well. They actually look good, and it's like, okay, you're this is a good looking physique, and in just not so great lighting. Okay, that's cool. But then, a lot of these guys who look really underwhelming, it's like, well, you look at particularly their traps, their neck, their back thickness. That's kind of that's really not doing them any favors there. And maybe if you'd spent some of that time actually lifting, it would be harder to find lighting where you didn't look like you lift. I mean, yeah, you can find lighting that'll make it hard to see your ab definition. You can find lighting that won't show off your muscles, like every single muscle to the best degree. But I mean, if you have your traps, your shoulders, and just whether it's pecs or lats or some or erectors, just something to give you some thickness. I mean, you'll still look. Obviously, no one expects you to look your best, like you're in a gym photo shoot walking around the street because no one looks like that. But you can still look jacked in pretty much any circumstance. I mean, I get people ask me what supplements I take when I'm just like slouching through the grocery store in a thick hoodie. It's like you can't at a certain point you kind of can't hide it. And that's kind of the kind of regular dude aesthetics. It's kind of more important. I mean, another area that bodybuilders don't care about is the low back, like the spinal erectors. Bodybuilders don't care about that because they're getting down to such low body fat that kind of no matter what you have back there, you're going to have that Christmas tree shape. But if you're if you're trying to chill at body fat percentages that regular dudes can be at, you can still have a full set of back abs there at like regular teens body fats. And I mean maybe your abs are not going to look the most peeled and shredded, but you'll still have something, that's something impressive that, you don't have to be at super low body fat to see. I think a lot of the back is like that. Terry's majors. There's a lot of detail you can get in the back just by lifting, and you don't have to get crazy shredded. So I think that's definitely something that that bodybuilders neglect a little bit, or competitive bodybuilders rather. And not all, obviously. Some are just incredibly jacked everywhere, but there's a lot that just kind of seem to focus on just getting peeled, and it's like they don't necessarily have. It's almost like muscular development to some guys is a little bit of on the back burner, because I mean, really, if you come to one of these competitions and you're looking massive, but you just didn't get in the level of leanness that they want, they're going to say they're going to look down on that more than some guy that just shows up skinny. It's like, it's kind of like he drank the Kool-Aid, he participated in the culture, he did, like, he did the thing, he jumped, I mean, it really is that he drank the Kool-Aid. If you had somebody like John Grimek, I'm sure you've seen pictures of how incredibly massive he was. You can't find a picture of him getting that lean, though, right? And if he showed up to a modern bodybuilding competition, despite being super dominant back in the day, it's like, what are you doing, dude? You're not in condition, right? They'd say he was out of shape, and I mean, yeah, I'm ranting now. I'll stop.
No, that's great. It's like it's just the differences. It's just the differences between bodybuilding, the sport, which is part pageantry, and that's all fine and good, and that's just what it is, versus the rest of us who are just trying to train and be strong and feel good and like look a little jacked. And like again, having muscle on your body is what's going to do that. And I fear in some fear. I'm not scared of this. It's not, that's way too strong of a word to use, but it's like some of this the optimal, the science based, it's making people who are just getting into the gym miss an important part of training, which is like just pick up heavy weights and just do that for a while before you start playing with all of these things that are trying to squeeze out 0.1% more improvement in a muscle that's completely undeveloped yet. Like, I think that, and I've been seeing this more and more, and like at an increasingly high frequency in the local gym that I go to, where there's been a bunch of, I guess they offered some sort of teen membership over the summer, and a bunch of kids in there who are like 19, 20, 21, like obviously haven't been training very long, obviously don't have a lot of muscle, and it's not a judgment, it's just an observation. And they've got, the whole band cuff set up around the back, all this stuff. And I'm like, but just pick up the dumbbell that's 50 pounds over there and row it until you can't anymore. And that's going to do much more than this elaborate setup that you're trying to do. And I feel like they're going to be missing out on a lot of development, on actual muscle development. Now, do I have science to back that up? No, but I think that everyone has done that for the entirety of training. And now kids are starting off their lifting careers not doing that. And they may have some certain muscles that get super developed, but at the expense of other stuff, because there's not enough, I don't know, say synergy between their body, and like they're not using more of their musculature. And so I don't know if that's like even scientifically accurate, but that's just like an assessment that I have of what I'm seeing with some of the younger kids who are a few years behind me now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's like reductionism can be valuable. I mean, trying to figure out, like, trying to isolate variables and figure out what exactly we're trying to get out of something can be valuable, but can also be dangerous. A great example from the history of bodybuilding is eggs, right? So it's been known, for forever, or not, as long as bodybuilding's been a thing, that eggs are, strongman bodybuilders' favorite food, right? So then we start to learn about macros, and people think, oh, it's because of the protein. So, then you get the idea to, well, let's throw away the part with fat. We don't need that. Throw away the yolk, and we'll eat the whites, and that way we optimize for protein. And then later we find out that actually the yolk has a ton of valuable nutrients that probably are also beneficial for bodybuilders. So, unless you're replacing that somewhere, maybe you should just eat the whole thing. It's kind of like it is kind of like trying to base your diet on supplements. Just think, okay, what do I need in the diet? I'm going to take supplements for this, that, and the other. I mean, assuming that everything's bioavailable, which probably isn't, you could get away with that if you're completely on point. But if you're not quite as smart as you think you are, it's going to be a lot easier to miss something than if you were to just eat a whole food diet. And I think that's kind of what real. I'm being a little bit I'm stigmatizing a little bit, but I want to. I'm doing that on purpose. I mean, I think body weight and free weight exercises are, real exercises, machines are supplemental. Now that doesn't mean I'm against them. I had one of my guys, I said, hey man, let's do more. Actually, two of my guys, I just put on a lot more machines recently. One got injured, so obviously he needs that to train around an injury. I didn't do it to him, though. Don't, it wasn't some crazy lift. It was unrelated. But and then the other one just, he's a beast on compound exercises, and I just wanted to give him some some machine supplemental exercise for hypertrophy, so he could still do his strength training with the with the big compounds, and then just get some more isolated work on the side. Um, but so I think they can be valuable as like supplemental exercises for somebody that needs them. But if you have these young kids that haven't even built up their base, like they're probably missing something. Like for example, now it's big. You don't have to squat. You can do this, that, and the other to build your quads. Okay, are any of these kids actually thinking to go try and build their glutes? No, they're not. They're not doing glute isolations. So the second you start isolating things, there's probably going to be stuff that we're leaving out. We're going to be leaving out the mobility components. We do away with anything that requires us to move in longer ranges, like pullovers. We're probably not going to try to find some way to actively train that. As soon as we start isolating the back, most of these kids are going to completely ignore the spinal erectors. We're not going to train them. We're just trying to get the lats wide because that's all bodybuilders care about. So, there's probably a bunch of stuff in there. I mean, who knows what's in the rotator cuff, right? No one's thinking directly to train them unless you're at a very high level. So the more you isolate things, the more little things are going to get left out that you were probably actually training to some degree with the real exercises that now you're neglecting, which isn't to say that super high demanding high setup exercises are bad. I mean, where you would see them come into play typically is going to be more advanced lifters who maybe have injuries that they're trying to work around, or maybe just have a really specific stimulus that they're trying to get. Right? I mean, that's there's a time and place. I'm not even saying like never do a cuffed exercise, but it should generally. I would like to see older lifters with some experience and some lifts under their belt doing that, and then it's like, okay, well, he's probably got a good reason for it. When you see some kid who's been lifting for a year, it's like, no way. There's no way, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like it's been like barbell rows, for example, have been controversial for a while because a lot of people are saying, oh, it's a terrible lat exercise. They don't work lats. But I mean, a lot of these guys have been kind of using them off label, so to speak, for the spinal erectors. I mean, that was kind of. I mean, if you listen to the Golden Year guys speak, they almost say it's more for the erectors than the lats. So now we have all these kids taking out what was essentially the only movement that a lot of bodybuilders were doing for erectors. And again, now it's that muscle group's getting even more neglected. So yeah,
It's a
that's
good that's a good
yeah.
way
I'm
of
not.
it's a good way of putting it, that when you start to isolate things and you only use a stimulus for one specific outcome, well then you have to really like dial in your training to a degree that most people are not competent, capable, or willing to do, probably, in order to make sure that you're not missing anything. Whereas when you're just doing, your real exercises, your big basic compound lifts that have been done for forever and will always and forever work, it kind of just takes care of those for you. And then sure, you go and do some isolation stuff for fun, or if you are a high level bodybuilder, to specifically bring up that specific muscle or whatever. But it's like, the lats thing is like, I've never heard so many people talk about, oh, well, do it this way for lats. It's like, well, even like a classic dumbbell single arm row, people will kind of drive their elbow so far down towards their hip and say it's more lats. It's like, yeah, but what if you didn't want that to be more lats? It's like as if lats are the only thing that you need to train, and you're trying to get like those lower lat fibers. Like no one knew what that was 2.5 years ago, and now all of a sudden everyone cares about their lower lat fibers when you've been training for 6 months. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like saying the upper body or the front of your body is just entirely pecs. Like there's nothing else in the front of your body except pecs. That's all you need to develop, and you'll look great from the front. Well, there might be a couple other things here and there that also contribute.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
it is
think
kind of more. I guess it's more that way with the pecs. But still, I mean, you got to get your shoulders. You got to get your abs to a certain degree. There's more there than just purely lats, and it does the other stuff looks cool too.
Yeah, you're gonna end up missing out on stuff by trying to isolate too much. And I think where it will be highlighted is if and when someone in their journey of fitness, either because of injuries, because of boredom, because of variety, starts to look into some more of the old school type of lifts, or some more, call it, well, this is I don't think you're gonna like this term, but call it functional training, where you're like moving and doing like kind of weird movements and stuff, and because you want to, because you think it might give you some benefit, and you realize that, like, oh, I try and do a Jefferson curl and I'm like really strong on these like weird lat pull downs that I'm doing and all this other stuff, but I can't actually move my body in a way that like a human body should move, and that's where things are going to get exposed. And for purpose of the gym, it doesn't matter, but you know, you've got kids, you've been down to pick up your one of your kids, and like, and then you put your back out, but you're this big strong bodybuilder, like what are we doing here, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean that was definitely where I would have been if I hadn't done this. I mean, I would throw my back out on really dumb stuff. As a 600-pound deadlifter, all sorts of ways before I started doing all this stuff. Like the dumbest one back when I did CrossFit for a year, and I hurt my back. Really, I got a really nasty injury doing 75-pound thrusters. It was yeah, I couldn't get out of bed the next day, and I'd pulled 600 pounds that way, before, right? So that should not be the case, but what it actually turned out to be, now I kind of understand. I was actually pretty extension intolerant. Everybody's afraid of flexion. Nobody thinks about extension, but extension can, if you're not tolerant of it, it can jack you up just the same way. And I'd been doing, we'd had handstand push-ups in the workout right before, the thrusters. So I was getting into way more extension than my back was comfortable with there. So that is kind of a 1-2 punch. But anyway, yeah, like you shouldn't be. I shouldn't be getting hurt on 75-pound thrusters. I'd done like I think a 250-pound thruster at that point, and like yeah, I mean I'm deadlifting 600 pounds. Why should I be not at that time? All my lifts went down in CrossFit. I was pretty weak in CrossFit, but I could pull 500. If you deadlift 500 pounds, you shouldn't be getting hurt doing a 75-pound thruster, but there we are. But yeah, so now that I've gotten really good at loaded flexion, a lot more extension tolerant now. I mean, I'm doing stuff now, like just that's beneficial exercise that I guarantee would snap me up in terms of extension. Some of my favorite pullover variations require a little bit of it. The hands, now, ironically, I've gotten much better at handstand push-ups now, and that requires a lot of it. And now it's kind of a beneficial training stimulus, but that would all be a vector for injury that I just could not afford right now. I mean, yeah, definitely couldn't afford it. So yeah, I don't hate the term functional. I just think it's been used as a cope by people that just don't have strength. I mean, what they have may be functional, but they don't use any intensity. They don't train hard, and they're just kind of looking for ways to goof off in the gym and avoid doing anything real. Just kind of avoid comparison. It's kind of like I'll probably get some heat for doing this, but athletic can kind of training like an athlete, that functional and athletic are kind of in the same boat, just because like it is a real thing, but it's also something that you can use to just like muddy the waters and avoid comparison. um it's a little bit easier to just objectively compare if we're talking about strength on lifts or hypertrophy. You can see who's bigger, you can see who's stronger. There's a lot more wiggle room when it comes to something like function and athleticism to define, well, how do we define that? Which is not to say those aren't real things, and not to say that there aren't people who are actually training in a fashion that's making them more athletic. Just like there are people that are training in a way that's making them more functional, but just these kind of nebulous terms give us a little wiggle room to retreat from comparison if we're so inclined. But I don't mind the term, and I use it. I mean, one of the I I describe what I do as you know hypertrophy with the functional component not removed. Right? We're not taking out the mobility, we're not taking out the function, we're not taking out the strength. Just because you don't have to, right?
Yeah, that's a great qualifier, and I completely agree with your assessment of like the term and how it's been used, and all that, because people then you do stuff with no resistance, with no progressions. Sometimes it's just kind of like random movements. That's like, oh well, you just make it look like the sport that you're playing. And it's like, even for an athlete, the point of their gym workouts are to make them stronger and faster, not to do more of the thing that they just, a baseball player went to batting practice and swung the bat, 500 times. Like, they don't need to come in the gym and do 500, cable twists. Like, they just did that. So, maybe there's other things that they can work on. And again, if you're not an athlete, then you don't really need to be doing those things anyways. You just need to move well and feel good, and to be able to move well through all the ranges of motion. And to your point, the way you said it, like, you're not sacrificing any hypertrophy by blending these things in an intelligent way, where you are training progressively and with an actual intention, rather than, oh, well, just move. Like, that's great that you want to rotate and throw stuff and, jump around, but what are you actually trying to achieve other than just doing exercise? Which by all means is a good thing, and like, more of them, the world needs to do that. But if you want to achieve a goal, you've got to apply a little bit more specificity to it than like go out there and get sweaty.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these movements that people might look at as being functional or mobility, I mean, they can work great for hypertrophy. I mean, look at the Jefferson curl. It creates a lot of development. It was actually more popular among bodybuilders, according to Grimek, than the conventional deadlift in the 50s for hypertrophy. They called it the stiff leg deadlift at that time, but if you look at what they're doing, they were basically doing a Jefferson curl. The way it was looked at back then was the stiff leg deadlift or Jefferson curl was better for hypertrophy, and the conventional deadlift was better for strength athletes. So that was kind of how, I mean, they would all do both, right? But they kind of split it up that way. And I'm not sure exactly when it fell out of favor, but maybe, probably in, I don't know, the 70s or whatever. It seemed like by the golden era, most guys, instead of doing something like a stiff leg deadlift, were just doing their flexion rows, which kind of accomplished a lot of the same purpose. So yeah, maybe they were killing two birds with one stone. So they, got rid of the exercise, and then, later we developed the what we call the Romanian deadlift today, and our modern stiff leg deadlift, which really is not done with stiff legs, to be honest with you. Um, but yeah, I mean, that works well for hypertrophy. And again, these silver era guys actually valued the spinal erector hypertrophy because they weren't getting to 5% body fat. So if they wanted to have a lot of detail in their back, they needed to build those details through muscle, not through dieting. Same with the pullovers they liked. If you want a lot of detail in your back, just building up big teres majors through the pullover, it's almost like pecs on your back. And people think of it as just this tiny little thing that, you only see in an anatomy chart if you take all the skin away. But no, if you develop that, it's like, it's almost like pecs for your back. It really adds something additional. Um, so, and we do associate that more now with function mobility, but no, it's a solid exercise. And there's all these debates over what it actually trains. Is it a chest exercise? Is it a tricep exercise? Is it a lat exercise? Well, if you do it, you'd see what grew. And you can do it in a way that biases those things. I mean, your triceps are always going to be involved to a certain degree. I do actually think it's good to get that extra volume to the long head. Um, um, I don't. I think some people will use pecs a little bit more. You can set it up in a way that it does lats more. But yeah, I mean, those teres majors are going to grow, and then okay, well, there you go.
And I think the point also for something like that is like, who cares what it does like more, again, unless you're competing in bodybuilding. Like, yeah, you're trying to train everything anyways, so yeah, you're going to train all of those muscles, whether it's like a little bit more pecs or a little bit more lats or a little bit more triceps or a little bit more whatever. It's like, well, you're trying to get all of it anyway. So I'm not like, I get sometimes confused about like, why do people care so much? And I know part of it is just arguing for the sake of the internet, and that's, I understand that value, if you will. But for the average person out there, like, well, you're just trying to get bigger and stronger. So like, why
Yeah,
even care about that? And you're probably trying to move better too. So if it even makes your shoulders feel better and you don't get bigger or stronger, that's also a win. And that's extremely valuable, and maybe even more valuable for most people.
yeah, definitely. And that unlocks further movements like the behind the neck press, which no one does these days, which is excellent for. I mean, it's an excellent strength movement, hypertrophy, whatever. I think there's I I I have a hard time sitting through all those like really detailed diagrams, but my understanding is even on EMG studies, you get more activation in the side delts that everybody's so obsessed with developing on the behind the neck press than you do in most pressing variations, and that's certainly consistent with what I feel. Um, but it's something no one can do because they don't have the shoulder mobility, so it's not safe to do because we're not doing pullovers. So sometimes these mobility exercises can be effective for developing size and strength in their own right, and sometimes they can also just unlock other movements that are effective for that. I mean, you build those healthy shoulders, now you can press every which way. Maybe we're not going to have such issues with it's hard for naturals to build in big delts. Then no one complained about that back in the day when they were doing all this stuff. It's just now that we see like, well, the only effective delt exercise is the lateral raise because that's all anyone can do. And now we have that issue that natural guys can't build big delts or whatever.
Yeah, and then it's also an issue of like, well, yes, it's harder for natural people to build muscle compared to people who are on steroids. So like obviously they're not they're not going to be as big. So I again, it's another thing I miss where it's like, yeah, okay, it's harder, but of course it is. Like the training is not the issue. It's like, well, if you're not taking steroids, you're going to build less muscle than if you are taking steroids. So I don't like, yeah, of course it's harder, and you can just keep training and you'll get as big as you're going to get, and that's it. Most people are not even getting close to tapping out their genetic potential, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I think what a lot of people are going off of, I mean, there is this kind of steroid look with the shoulders where it almost looks like a
Yeah,
teenager in football pads. Like you'll see guys that develop these really big shoulders, but their arms are actually kind of really underwhelming. And it's kind of an odd. It looks like kind of like a like a high school, like a relatively leaner, like more slender high school football player in shoulder pads. It is kind of an odd look. So I do think it's something that you can in some cases just take gear and it blows up randomly for some reason, but that doesn't mean the naturals can't develop it. You just actually have to know how to train it. Same thing with traps. I mean, you can train it effectively, but probably doing some just some lateral raises and we're not going to press because that's not an effective shoulder exercise is not that's probably not going to be the ticket, and that's probably why before gear was invented. Well, no, I'm not even going to say that because I mean, I think all the actual champions are still going to be incorporating some kind of vertical presses. They're not ideological.
yeah. I mean the safest bet for anyone listening to this is like keep doing the stuff that works, that has always worked rather. Uh, Play around and experiment and have fun in the gym because that's also part of it too. And if you want to just do some like weird exercise you saw on Instagram because you want to try it, I mean, like go for it by all means. Who are we to say not to? But don't base your entire training off of like one Instagram post. That is certainly not a good idea. Um, One thing that I wanted to kind of switch gears on, unless you had something else that you wanted to kind of mention on this topic. Is there anything?
I go for it.
You are a big proponent of using fasting in dieting. Can you talk to me about your approach and how you personally use fasting when trying to cut down?
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, we're kind of hitting a common theme here. I think that's another area where the competition is kind of at odds with what works for the common man. So I mean, if you look at the traditional way of cutting that's promoted by the fitness industry, it's you track your calories, whether you get one of the apps that many of these people are conveniently selling, or get a spreadsheet or whatever. But you have to, weigh everything, measure everything out, make sure you're in a calorie deficit, and there you go, right? Well, obviously that's a little bit time consuming, and frankly, it just kind of sucks because you're just having to obsess that much more over food. I mean, you have to not just eat it, but you have to sit there and look at it, measure it out. You're looking at it, you're thinking about it, you're smelling. It makes things difficult, and it's done for a reason because these guys have to cut down to very low body fat where legitimately you need to have a high degree of precision or you're probably going to lose muscle and just have a lot of negative effects because you're not supposed to get that lean. um Dieting below 10% body fat is that's where muscle loss actually is an issue. That's been documented across species. Apparently, I haven't actually. I'm referencing a study which referenced the textbook. I didn't go get the textbook, but apparently it's been observed across species that when animals get below 10% body fat, that's where we get rapid uh, cascading losses of lean tissue. But anyway, so kind of the polar opposite of that is fasting. Just don't eat. You don't have to think about food, do anything about food. Just forget about food and just go on about your day. Um, and it's first of all, zero time investment. You take zero time to fast. You don't have to prepare food. You don't have to meal prep. You don't have to weigh it. You don't have to measure it. You don't have to look at it. Nothing. You can just completely forget about it and just go do something productive with your life. And then once you adapt, which usually takes place after the first day, you kind of have to. I mean, it's not horrible, but you do kind of have to suck it up for the first day. Not the end of the world, but it's not. I'm not gonna, tell you it's wonderful. But, past that, a lot of the hunger and craving subsides. I'm actually in day 2 of a fast right now. I wasn't planning on it, but my kids got sick, and I'm not advocating this for anyone else, but what I have found is that if I get exposed to a cold from them and I fast, I don't get it. It's been I'm not going to tell everyone else that it works, but I've run this experiment enough times on myself that it works for me. Again, not I'm not going to tell you 100% if you fast, you're not going to get a cold, right? But it does work for me. So anyway, yeah, I'm on day 2. Yeah, not even thinking about food, not hungry, whatever. Um, yeah, it's super convenient. Your energy is fairly high. I'm not going to say it's wonderful. It's kind of hard to relax and chill and just enjoy life. Like you can't just like sit down and watch the sunset and be like, I'm happy. But like, if you're working, if it's a work day, it's perfect. Or especially like a day when you just have to get a lot of like boring, repetitive errands done where you just have to be doing stuff. Maybe you don't love, but you just have to do perfect. I even used it when we had our third kid. I started fasting when we went to the hospital, and it was kind of helpful because it helped me to just pop up out of sleep at any time of the day with a little bit more energy. You don't wake up as groggy. I just did that for like the first 5 days, just helping the wife at the hospital, driving back to put the kids down to nap, put them to bed, and everything. Just kind of help with just being on the go all day and not taking breaks. It's perfect for that. Again, it's not like, oh, I'm blissful, I'm happy. Some people talk about it like it's a really enjoyable thing, but it's just so productive. So the point of all that being, like, th- what sounds better for the average, like, busy person, with a demanding job, a parent, somebody who just does not have a lot of time? Should we be weighing and measuring everything and counting it out? Which, by the way, people are terrible at. Um, even competitive bodybuilders in a lot of cases are terrible at tracking their calories. I mean, you're familiar with Lane Norton's uh, metabolic damage theory?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that was
Loosely.
all based on apparently he was getting emails from competitive bodybuilders telling him they weren't losing weight even though they were eating 1,000 calories, and so he came up with this whole theory that you were doing metabolic damage by eating too few calories. Apparently, promoted the idea, made it a big thing. You still see all sorts of people promoting it today. And then what it turned out was, and of course there were no actual studies on this because no study's going to show I'm not saying no studies have showed metabolic slowdown because that will, if you lose a lot of body fat, your metabolism will slow down, but not to the extent that you have people, dieting on 1,000 calorie, active, gym goers dieting on 1,000 calories a day and not losing fat or even gaining fat. Like your metabolism gets damaged so much that you're actually gaining body fat on, 1,200 calories a day because it's just slowed down so much. No, that doesn't happen. He didn't have any studies. He just had a bunch of accounts of competitors saying that, and he just kind of went off half cocked off that. And you still see people today like promoting this as their business, like talking about how you get metabolic damage if you eat too few calories, and you will help you undamage your metabolism. No, the reality is people just suck at tracking their calories. It's very hard. It's there's just so many little places for temptation to slip in. Just put an extra scoop here, an extra scoop there. You don't even realize you're doing it. Um, yeah, it's rough, and I mean this is like scientists in the industry know. My undergrad mentor was a weight loss psychologist, kind of or I guess you say a diet psychology. That was kind of his specialty. He focused on that, and he just gave up, started experimenting on rats because they lie less. He just completely gave up on. So we were doing studies on rats with and artificial sweeteners because he just got sick of humans because they lie too much about diet. And I mean, the only
That's
the only
hilarious.
reliable studies you get are on institutionalized people, either in hospitals, somewhere where an external party has complete control over their food, because that's the only way you can really tell what someone's actually eating, what they're not, is if the researchers are in control of the food they're eating. So yeah, people suck at that, and that leads to people. That leads to a lot of people who say, "Oh, well, I have these special genetics. I can't lose weight. I've tried dieting. It didn't work for me. I did this, that, and the other. It didn't work for me." And they believe it. They believe, they don't think they're lying to you. They believe that they actually ate at a calorie deficit, and they didn't succeed. But obviously they didn't. So then you take fasting. Well, that makes it binary. Did I eat today or did I not? Now, I'm not talking about intermittent fasting, like 16 hours, right? You can totally trust me. You can eat way more than your calorie needs in an 8 hour window. I've been there. That's why I think intermittent fasting, like, it's not the best approach by itself for fat loss, because you'll have the honeymoon period where, like, you're not used to eating that much in a short time window, so you do lose weight. It feels kind of easy, and you're like, oh, I like this. But then you get to the point where, yeah, you're eating everything you were before, in that window. But when you get into multi-day fasting, like, you're going 2 days, 3 days, okay, it's binary. Did I eat today? Did I not? And if you didn't, and unless you have some serious mental issues, like, unless maybe somebody doesn't know, thinks they can order a coffee with a bunch of sugar in it, and that's but it's pretty easy to know if you actually, yes, I ate, no, I did not. So I think that's better for developing, like, it's for just staying sane, developing self-efficacy, and realizing that, no, I don't have magical genetics that allow me to defy the laws of physics. I actually can lose weight. It's better for someone who's busy, doesn't have a lot of time. I mean, I would kind of say that it's honestly easier for me when I'm busy to lose weight, just because I I don't have to deal with the or the after meal crashes. I don't have to take time to go fix something to eat. Um, yeah, like, at this point in my life, trying to, like, you know build build and grow my business while having three very small kids that are needing constant attention. That's the one area of fitness that is actually easy to improve. Like, I'm the leanest I've ever been, and that's why it's something that requires zero time. The workouts, I'm trying to get in what I can. I'm making progress on the very, very few areas that I can prioritize, but it's relatively few. I'm making progress where I can, but there's a lot of stuff that I am neglecting to do that. But the dieting, yeah, zero time investment. So there you go. And it
That's
really
a
doesn't suck that
super
much. It's
Yeah, I was just
so
gonna
I
say
think
it's a super good frame to think like, hey, this is way less input. Whereas trying to track your calories and trying to
mhm,
overhaul your diet, try to do all this stuff it's actually it's more work. Now,
mhm.
of course, if you're just eating like potato chips and junk food, like, yeah, maybe you should also clean up that from a nutrition standpoint, in addition to trying some fasting or some calorie restriction of some sort. Like, the solution is definitely not eat McDonald's 3 days a week and then don't eat for the other
Yeah.
days of the week. Like, I mean, I get
Oh yeah,
in
definitely.
theory, like, that would work, but that's not something that I think you or I or anyone would really like advise, because there's more to it than just losing fat. But it is super practical once you get used to it, because like you said, it's not glamorous, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You don't fast for a day and, oh my god, I can see everything, I can see new colors. Like, it's not it's not that. And it is difficult to it may be super difficult for people to work up to, in the beginning. Did you have, like, when did you start doing it? Did you have trouble kind of like getting to a multi-day fast, and how would you advise people to start trying to do this?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I tried it years ago, probably in, like, maybe, I don't know, 2012, 2013, something around there. I did, I think, 48 hours. It was pretty hard. It was rough trying to get to sleep. I actually couldn't really sleep that night. Woke up and went hiking, and got got in a little standoff with a rock that I wasn't sure if it was a bear or not. Turned out to be a rock, but it was like misty at night. So it was a rough first night. I'm not going to lie about that. And then the day after I broke the fast, I tried bench pressing and I was super weak. So I thought I'd lost muscle and I didn't try it again for a decade, right?
Right.
Turns out that's not the case. I actually, like, now that I'm fully, that I'm more adapted, I don't lose any strength even while I'm fasting. I typically perform just as well as normal. That took some time to adjust to, but yeah, it definitely takes some acclimation, but the initial experience is not going to be uh, the same as your experience throughout. So just because you have one that's kind of rough, it's a little bit hard to sleep. And I've also learned to take electrolytes. Something with magnesium helps with the sleep. Didn't know about that back then. That definitely helps, and I think also with the performance, taking some kind of an electrolyte supplement. Like people say, Element is a grift, and I think for normal people, you probably don't need a bunch of extra salt if you're just going through your normal life. But if you're doing multi-day fasting, it's definitely worth the price. So I use it, and I think that's part of it. But I think part of it, a lot of it's just your body adapting to it, and becoming maybe metabolically flexible is the correct word. Um, but yeah, now I don't have any decreased workout performance or anything like that, and I have certainly not lost any muscle. And people are going to want to see a DEXA scan. Those aren't reliable. Um, I mean, you'll have people getting results all over the map. I mean, what I can see is that each year when I cut down, I'm heavier at the same body, or yeah, heavier at the same visible body fat percentage. I can still see the areas where I grew. Like I've emphasized brachialis a lot this year. I can see that being better. I can see the gains in the areas I was planning to that I was bulking this year. So it's pretty clear that the muscle is hanging out. And if you look at the actual research on it, what little there is, there's not much. But if you look at what little there is, it would tend to indicate that you lose a little bit of lean tissue during the fast, but your body is just set to replace it as soon as you start eating it. Just like with glycogen, right? You're gonna lose all your glycogen during the fast, right? But then, I mean, your body doesn't just leave the tanks empty; it's going to refill them. Same with any skeletal muscle you lose. And that again is probably down to about 10% body fat is probably where that. I mean, I don't quote me on that. There's not a lot of research on this, but if you look at the animal models, that's the best number I can give you would probably be probably around 10% body fat is where you would probably want to actually worry about muscle loss. But up until that point, it's just not an issue. And I mean, if I'm hitting rep PRs, completely fasted, yeah, probably not losing muscle in that area.
Yeah. And like most people are clearly not close to 10% body fat. And even if there was like some small amount of muscle loss, like you lose 100 grams of muscle, like kind of who cares? Like no one's going to notice that. You're not going to feel that. If the DEXA is even accurate enough to pick that up, which it's not, like there's no way of even quantifying that. And like, again, no one's trying to like measure the amount of muscle mass they have. It's just like, do you look good? Do you feel good? And do you perform well? And if you can check those three boxes, then like who cares what the rest of the stuff says, so long as you're like generally healthy. But like, a difference of a couple grams of muscle mass here and there is just not going to matter for pretty much anyone.
Yeah, but I think I really don't think you lose any. I kind of think
Yeah.
once you are signaling to your body that you need it, your body's going to make that happen.
Yeah.
I mean, you're reluctant to build. I think a lot of again, bodybuilders, they have like a really negative view of the body, and I'm not trying to be all like touchy feely and like woo positive hippie stuff, but I just think like the body is essentially a machine that's designed for survival in a certain circumstance. It's designed to put on the amount of muscle that your external environment is signaling that it needs. And maybe some guy is going to get a little bit disappointed when he doesn't get what he wants, but that's maybe not what he's signaling to his body that
Mm.
he needs through his training. So they get these negative views of, oh, the body's just always trying to lose muscle and gain fat. Well, no, if you're actually signaling that you need muscle, your body's going to try to maintain that muscle. It's you signal to your body that it needs it. It's gonna maintain that. If it has to temporarily break it down, it's gonna restore it, right? People act like you're gonna if you fast, as soon as you start eating again, your body's going to leave any muscle that you broke down, any glycogen source. We're not going to deal with it. We're not going to like rebuild any of that. We're just going to rebuild, body fat. But that's not the priority. The body fat is extra, right? I mean, I think it might be helpful to imagine some other animal. Like, would you think some other animal works that way, like a shark? Like, a shark hasn't gotten any food for a couple days, and then it eats a fish. Is it gonna like leave any protein in its body broken down, not refill its? I don't know if sharks have glycogen. Do sharks have glycogen? I don't know.
No, I
But
have no idea.
would that be what you would expect a shark to do? Would it just like leave its
Right.
muscles depleted and just build body fat? No, well, we're an organism too. Like we have to be adapted. First and foremost, we have to be able to go out and get food. So if we signal to our bodies that we need a certain amount of muscle to go do that, that's going to be the priority. Again, until you get down to starvation levels, and that I think that at that point it's more about at a certain point the body just you don't have enough fat for the body to mobilize that much at one time to actually cover your calorie needs. But yeah, I mean, muscle's not it's not an efficient source of calories for your body. That would be a very foolish way to design an organism. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the bodybuilders' pessimism is just not founded. That would be we didn't survive this long by being designed that badly. That would be if you just like think about it, get away from all
Yeah.
your feelings about the subject. It would just be a really bad way to design an organism, and we function a lot more a, a lot better than that. It just wouldn't work.
Yeah, yeah, super good frame, and again, it goes back to this common theme of like, yeah, this may be true and may be relevant for high level bodybuilders, but for again the rest of the 99.99% of us that are not that, that is just not. It's not true, and nor is it relevant, even if it was true. And more of if you even imagine that you are experiencing muscle loss during a fast or during a cut of some sort, it may also be to your point about what your external environment is demanding or what you are demanding from your external environment. Maybe you stop training or you train with way less intensity or you just in your mind you're like, oh, you succumb to this idea that like I'm going to lose muscle because I'm cutting, and then your training suffers and everything is just, then yeah, maybe you might feel that way because maybe you feel a little bit more flat because you have less calories, and that's not necessarily muscle loss. That's just a feeling. Maybe it's visual, maybe it's just all in your head. And then you say like, oh, I can't do that because I'm going to lose muscle. It's like, well, I don't think that that's necessarily true. And maybe if it is true, it's because you created that, not because it was going to happen if you were doing everything quote unquote perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think a lot of that may actually. I'm going to blame bench press for that. Actually, I feel like the primacy of the bench press in our lives is the first and foremost strength exercise. I think that may have a little bit to do with it because the bench press just loves being fat, and I like the bench press. I'm not anti bench press. It's a wonderful movement. I advocate it. I have all my guys. Well, not all. I have most of my guys bench if it's applicable to them. If
Sure.
obviously exceptions exist, but I like the bench press. But I will tell you, it loves being fat. So you are always going to, or no, I don't want to say always, but it's going to be hard to cut body fat and not have your bench press go down, and that's demoralizing. You feel weaker. But when you get into other lifts, when you get into more variety of lifts, like none of the others are affected. It's strict press, strict overhead press. Like I had an easier time I had an easier time strict pressing my body weight at 230 than at 200. It's easier at 230 to strict press, or at least for me. I when I get lean, my strict press really suffers. I want to try it again actually and see if I can actually be good at lean now that I've gotten pretty good at handstand push-ups, and I feel like that'll help. But anyway. Point being, with pressing, I've always noticed like a really steep drop off due to body fat levels. But if you get into all sorts of other exercises, a little bit more variety, just not the case. Maybe squats too. I feel like that's a little bit more. Um, I think that depends a little more. I've never felt like I get that much out of body fat on squats, but I have really lanky proportions, so probably I'm not like it's spread out too much for me to get the kind of compression effect. I know some guys obviously will get a lot out of being heavier on squats. Deadlifts, you're not really going to get much of anything out of. And then you start getting into all sorts of other esoteric lifts, and yeah, it's like body fat almost doesn't matter. So they I feel like broadening your perspective in terms of the exercises you care about will kind of get rid of that. And then if you get into body weight stuff, but then you get bonuses when you cut down. You feel stronger, yay! So it's I love bench press, but we have to balance out the perspective a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the not necessarily a nice thing to say, but the easiest way to get better at pull-ups is to lose weight. If you
Yep.
pull less, it's gonna improve faster than the strength of your overhead or vertical pulling is gonna improve. But yeah, I mean, makes sense that like some of those lifts are improved. That's why all the best, strongman, power lifter, all those guys, like none of them are like 7% body fat. There's a reason why they're shaped the way that they are, because it makes them stronger. But again, if you're not trying to do that, you don't need to be like that. And I think that's, it's hard for people to separate those things just because of the way messaging is on social media, and people need to be extreme and want to argue and all these things. But if you stop and think about it, you can realize, hey, that doesn't actually apply to me, because I'm not that thing and I'm not trying to be that thing. And so, like, hey, yeah, my bench press might suffer, but I'm also not trying to be the world's strongest bencher. I'm just trying to have a good looking chest and shoulders and be strong and feel good. And if that means I don't bench press anymore, then so be it. Right. And maybe that's the frame that people need to kind of try and shift their mind around.
Yeah, just I mean, there is so much out there that you can do to be genuinely strong. Like if you look at the old timers, like especially in the Bronze era, there was just this a really almost stark line between the pressing specialists and everybody else. Like you'll have guys like Lewis Sear, um, Paul Anderson, who were very portly, shall we say, and they were obviously the ones who were pressing just crazy weights overhead. You had the guys who just specialized in pressing weights overhead, and they were always very big, and then the guys who weren't as good at that and did everything else, and they were ripped, right? Like you look at and frankly, I would still say I mean, in my opinion, the strongest guys were the ripped ones, just because they were more versatile. I mean, if you can do one thing really well and the other guy, can't do it as well, but then the other guy can just do so many more things who's stronger. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to say. Some people would say, well, there's just more force being output by the bigger guys. But if you compare somebody like if you compare somebody like Paul Anderson or Lewis Sear, who are both just incredible at just putting weights overhead strictly, to someone like Herman Gorner, who he was huge. He was a beast, but he was ripped. I mean, the guy just had so many things that he could do well. From crazy kettlebell feats overhead, four kettlebells weighing over 400 pounds overhead, not strict pressed, but gotten up there. Four of them, one hand deadlifts over at least 600 pounds on a bar, or 660 on a barbell. Just all sorts of crazy stuff. There's just like 300-pound one hand clean. It's just all sorts of stuff. There's just so much variety there. I mean, I don't know. I'd say that's pretty strong. It's if you look at some of the strongest men in history. I mean, before the steroid issue, where now we're building, you know, and even then, I mean, a lot of the there's always going to be an argument for fairly lean folks. They're not going to be the best at bench press, and they're not going to be the best at strict press, but best all around, yeah, there's going to be some people with abs in that equation.
Yeah. And really, I mean, what is it all for if you don't want to just like look cool and like do cool stuff,
Yeah,
like isn't that what we all like really started training for, like just to like look cool and like
yeah.
look like a Dragon Ball Z character and just like do cool shit. I just want to be able to do more push-ups than my friends. I want to run faster than other kids at recess. I want to like, isn't that what we all got into this for? And then we get caught up in like stuff that doesn't matter, just like look cool, do cool stuff, and like basically that's it.
Exactly. Be the best version of yourself, which isn't necessarily going to mean optimizing yourself for the demands of one thing. Like, who's the best version of me? And maybe not the guy that can bench press the absolute most, but the guy who can do a bunch of other cool stuff. Yeah. And look good
Yeah,
while
and
doing it. But I
exactly.
mean,
And then
maybe you are that bench press guy. Maybe that's your natural talent. Maybe you want to, lean into that. Okay. That's fine too. But I think a lot of people are kind of round pegs and square holes, and maybe think that they're well, I think a lot of people think they're not strong because they're not good at the power lifts, and I think a lot of people, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are just kind of like really are just comparing themselves to the standards of certain competitions instead of like thinking about what they can do to develop outside of that. And I think, yeah, just self development needs to be a little bit more emphasized rather than just like, okay, these are the tracks that we can go on.
yeah, it's even now we have so much more documentation of everything. Everything's filmed, and we have more records and all this stuff. when you compare yourself to people who are different than you, even in just in terms of your anatomy, like for me, I'm pretty short. Like I can't reasonably compare myself. Like I can to say like, oh, I should be able to dunk. It would be extremely impressive if I could dunk. I'm like 5'6", 5'7" on a good day. It would be pretty impressive if I could dunk, or if I could, whatever. If I was in the NBA, like that would be a pretty wild aspiration for someone like me to have. But compare it to something else that your body is more suited for, then yeah, compete in that. But don't try and compete at things that the upper echelon of people who are built to be suited to that thing are doing exceptionally well. You're just doing yourself a disservice. Just like focus on what you can do and what you like, and then just get better at that, and don't worry about trying to be compare yourself to the absolute best in the world at that thing. It's just a useless endeavor.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think way too many people think of things in terms of like good genetics versus bad genetics. Like people who are in the NBA or the NFL have good genetics and everyone else has bad genetics. More likely, you might just be good at different stuff. I mean, genetically speaking, just in terms of biology, if there were really like large groups of people out there who just had great genetics and people who just had bad genetics, you'd have what's called a sweep, where the people with the good genetics would just that 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 gene would just completely take over. If one was just
Right.
better, that would just take over, and the only people with bad genetics would be like rare mutants. So it would actually be and it's on the other end of the equation, large numbers of people with bad genetics are probably going to weed themselves out of the gene pool. So it makes a lot more sense that we just have some variation. Maybe we're good at different stuff. Maybe some people are. Maybe if our strength sports were configured a different way, it would be a different genotype or a different different things would be selected for than what we have now. I mean, to a certain extent, like powerlifting kind of selects for a certain body type that's a little bit different from strongman. Like everyone kind of thinks of powerlifting as being strength, but it's kind of like a in some cases it's like a who can have the shortest legs at a given body or at a given body weight competition,
Right.
right? That's obviously, but then you look at strongman, that's obviously not as much the case, right?
Yeah.
Different it doesn't mean you're necessarily weak because you have long legs, but you may not be as advantaged at that particular sport. But then I love how like people act like if there was more money in powerlifting, suddenly you get a bunch of you get a bunch of people coming in from other sports and dominating powerlifting because they just have such amazing genetics. But the reality is, most of those other sports, for the most part, I mean, if you look at like basketball, for example, that basketball is not selecting for the type of people that would be good at powerlifting.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of them are very strong, but typically I don't look at them and see the proportions that I think of as like a massive squatter, right? So like this whole good and bad is I think a little bit overdone. I think people probably just need to find what they're good at, and chances are that they're just if what you're looking at you're not good at, you're probably just good at something else rather than just being defective. That's just statistically more likely.
It's also people picking and choosing things to blame their genetics on. Like people will say, "Oh, my bicep insertions are not good, so I don't have good bicep genetics." Like, yeah, but there are millions, billions of people who don't even enjoy or think about exercise in any way, and they hate the idea of exercise. So if you even remotely enjoy working out, you already have better genetics than the vast majority of the human race for working out, because you actually do it because you like it. And so if you take the entirety of the situation in there, it's like, yeah, you're way ahead of people who like just aren't going to do this. You could have the best insertions and whatever in the planet. If you hate working out for whatever reason, you will never develop those things. And so, yes, you may have great physical genetics or physical potential for great bodybuilding, but you will never pursue it. And so, therefore, it's kind of useless. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the mental stuff is definitely a factor too. I mean, it's harder. Well, I mean, all this stuff is hard to actually. It's hard to actually confirm what we're talking about
Exactly.
with the genetic stuff. That's why I don't usually like talking about it much, just because we are kind of just making assumptions. But yeah, I mean, we know that a lot of mental characteristics are also highly heritable. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a factor too.
Yeah. Very good, man. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today? Anything else that you feel like we left out, and we're kind of, I want to be respectful of your time. So
Um, yeah, nothing's standing out.
awesome. Alrighty. Well, we will leave it there. I think we've given people, enough to chew on and enough to process and think about, and hopefully, get some good outcomes from this. Where can people find you? Anything that you got coming up that you want to let people know about?
Well, so until recently, you could find me at atlaspowershrugged on Instagram. I'm currently banned. Hopefully, by the time this comes out, that'll no longer be the case. But look for me there. If I'm not there, it's atlaspowershrugged_2. That's my new alternative account. Like I say, hopefully the situation gets resolved. I'm also at atlaspowershrugged on YouTube. And I've got a website, atlaspowershrugged.com. You can buy my books there. I've got Old Time Lifts for Modern Lifters, which is basically an exploration of the old school lifts that we're talking about here, with an eye towards not just hyping them up and putting them on a pedestal, but actually looking at them from the perspective of a modern lifter. Like, which of them do we, the modern lifters, actually need to focus on most? Which ones fix holes in modern training, and which ones are cool but maybe not the most applicable? And with each one, of course, what are they actually good for? And of course, in great detail, how to perform them. And then I've also got the Antifragile Diet, which discusses my take on fasting as well as diet, just to kind of what I described in this podcast, make losing fat and staying lean something that just kind of synergistically works with a really busy life, rather than being some like high time investment thing that you do as part of a very dedicated, disciplined fitness strategy. And then I also offer coaching. So if probably the best way to reach me is just Instagram, whichever Instagram I happen to be on at the time. Just DM me and we'll chat, see if it's a good fit for you. My specialty there, I would say, is hypertrophy with all the other stuff, kind of like we said earlier, without all the other stuff taken out. You can get some bang for your buck, mobility, functional strength, all that good stuff, while building the muscles you want. That would be, I guess, my elevator pitch. I didn't do a terrible job at that. But anyway, I'm scaling that up. Trying to grow the community aspect of that as well. So if you're interested, just chat with me on Instagram and we'll see if it's a good fit.
Amazing. Thank you, sir. I will get the functioning Instagram handle in the show notes when this comes up. But Atlas Power Shrugged on all the platforms and website, and get the ebooks and stuff as well. They're phenomenal. Thank you very much, man. Is there any last words that you want to leave the people with here in closing?
No, just great conversation, man. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. And thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Again, Atlas Power Shrugged. I'll get the Instagram handle, the functioning one, when this episode airs. But look for it on YouTube and the website and all that stuff. Share the episode with your friends and all those good things. 5-star reviews all around helps the show grow and spread the good message. That's that. Go outside. Be a good person. See you next time.